former National Security Advisor, Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, pleading guilty today to lying to the FBI.
Flynn knew exactly how the system worked. He knew exactly what the intel world had been up to. He understood its funding. They had to get rid of Flynn.
There was a moment where I just felt like I was drowning. So I'm in there with these other political appointees. They're all supposed to go in there and tell what they believe to be the truth. What they did was they took my assessment and they wanted me to change it. And I was like, I'm not changing it.
He was, by definition, the most dangerous possible person for Donald Trump to hire.
President Obama said, but I do have one specific recommendation. Stay away from Michael Flynn. He's bad news.
Over time, instead of being pounded down below the surface of the ocean, we started to fight. I'm now above the surface.
That gets me fired up. This is the AlphaWarrior Show. I am your host, Alpha. Something flew in my eye at the last second there. That's okay. That's fun. You guys, welcome. Operation Gladio. A lot of you who are here Wednesday nights for this specific show to listen to the Colonel and myself dive into this very interesting, very eye-opening operation. If it's the first time you're coming here because you've heard about this, we're on part 10, so you got some catching up to do. But all those links are down in the description. Before we get into the show today, you guys, though, Alpha's got to keep the lights on. So let me get to a sponsor. Goldco, alphalikesgold.com. Be prepared. It's easy. It's fast. Rich are buying gold. So that should kind of clue you in on what's going on. But if you've turned on the TV or you've watched anything on the news or online, our country is down and out right now. The Tower of Babel is falling, so to speak. And now's the time to protect yourself and your temple from destruction. And to do that, that means protecting your resources, including your savings, so you can protect and defend your legacy and your posterity from destruction. And that's why thousands of good Americans are arming themselves with physical gold and silver with my partners, Goldco. So again, go to alphalikesgold.com. Links are in the description. But also, if you call my partners, you can go to Goldco today and tell them that you heard this podcast. You can get up to $10,000 worth in bonus silver from Goldco on some qualified accounts just for signing up. And it's super easy. So, and for those that, well, how do I call them, Alpha? There's no number on the screen. When you go to alphalikesgold.com, and there's a little thing that'll populate on your screen or on your phone. It's marine proof, you guys. It's first name, last name, phone number, and email. They will send you within like 10 minutes. You'll get an email from them, just acknowledging that you filled out that interest form. On that email they send you is a phone number that's specifically for my audience. And when you call them, that's when you get the little bonus goodies. So for those that are wondering, that's how it is. And also that's during business hours. So when that phone number comes. And then our last commercial, and we are going to go commercial free. I'm used to those things. I'll break that habit another time. But commercial free until the end of the show. America's favorite mustache. And I'll see you guys in 60 seconds with the Colonel.
When I started MyPillow, it was just a problem solution, one product company. Well, since then, with the help of my dedicated employees, we now have hundreds of products, some you might not even know about. To get the word out, we're having a $25 extravaganza. 2-pack multi-use MyPillows, $25. MyPillow sandals, $25. And for the first time ever, our 6-pack towel sets, you guessed it, just $25. Our brand new 4-pack dish towels, $25. And I've never done this before. Premium MyPillows with all new Giza fabric, any size, any loft level, even king size for only $25. And there's so much more. So go to MyPillow.com or call the number on your screen. Use your promo code for our $25 extravaganza. Order $75 and over. Your entire order ships absolutely free.
$25. Mike, make a pillowcase with a mustache. $25. You'll sell out. You'll make us both rich, Mike. Let me bring on the Colonel. How are you doing, ma'am?
Great. How are you?
I'm good. Watching Mike's commercial there, and I'm in California. You know that, Colonel. The audience knows that. So it gets hot out here during the summer. So it gets really cold too for those that think, well, California, you guys don't know nothing about cold. Yeah, we don't know the blizzards, but we know cold weather. And so, I have these thick, this ain't racist, you guys. This is just the way I was called. We call them the Mexican blankets, because they're like so freaking thick, and I love them. They always have like some, weird paintings on them. But it's like, one day to the next, it's like, oh, we're done with that one. It's time to pull out the summer sheets. And so, of course, I'm going to support Mike. So even if his products weren't good, I would support him. I'm not saying they're not good, everybody. Don't misunderstand me here. Mike's going to kill me. Take the guy off the promo codes. But I remember the first time I got the Giza sheets, I was like, wow, like pleasantly surprised. Like I was just, I was like, all right, just regular sheets.
Okay.
But
so I have a 4-bedroom house. I have a motor home with 2 beds in it. And every one of them has Mike's sheets on them. Every one of them has Mike's pillows on them. And every bathroom I have in a 2.5 bath plus 2 bathrooms at the motorhome has his towels in them. So I'm a huge Mike Lindell fan. And while I agree with you in theory, they're all excellent products. And I wouldn't have anything else in my house.
But it was cool because I was like I was so surprised. Oh, people are gonna take that the bad way, but I'm just, you're gonna be surprised too when you go to My Pillow and you order these things, because I'm used to going to like Macy's and just like God breaking an arm to get some sheets, and yeah, they feel good, but I was like, man, like this was a great deal.
It is.
And they feel amazing. So there's my selling there. I did it, Mike. I did it Alpha's way. Colonel, we are on, part X, that's pretty interesting, part 10 of the series. Everybody's talking about it. We're hearing big voices talking about it. You're doing some cool things. If you don't mind, and I know I'm putting you on the spot here, but you just had an event recently. Yesterday, and the pictures were super cool, and you had a panel that I just told you was like wow. Kind of tell us, what was that event, and for people that want to get to the next one, how do they find out?
So in order to find out, just DM me on either True Social or X.
Follow her on Rumble. That's how you find out. Follow her on Rumble.
And get in the chat and ask me, and I can give you email addresses for the lady that kind of orchestrates the administrative side of the entire thing. But a whole bunch of people in Central Florida went to a Great American Restoration Tour event, GART, put on by Badlands Media in Cocoa Beach. And we opened our own Florida Badlands fan club Telegram page. And so we could all keep in contact, because it was the first time many of us had met fellow Floridians at an event like that. So 2 months ago, we held the first, what we labeled as Badlands Fan Club of Florida. And we had Red Pill 78, Stormy Patriot Joe, Brian Cates, and General Quask, and myself there, but we didn't actually talk. We kind of just had a luncheon where we all just talked amongst ourselves. This month, yesterday, we had the second one, in which Brian Cates, myself, Stormy Patriot Joe, and General Quask formed a panel. We each talked for about 15 minutes. Brian, of course, went overtime, and it was kind of a joke between Stormy and I, and allowed the audience to ask questions. So they got, up front and personal. So I had Brian go first and then Stormy, and Stormy kind of, like you often do, inadvertently led me into my conversation. And so I asked the audience, and there was probably about 40 people there, if they were aware of Operation Gladio and had come across it. Well, of course, all of their hands shot up. and which was very flattering. And of course, most of them had heard about it because of your show. And yes, exactly. And so amongst the audience, kind of, because it was, not a formal kind of thing. They were like, oh, I'm only on episode 6. Don't ruin it. Don't talk ahead or whatever. And so it was very interesting, kind of just gave a brief overview. They had tons of questions. And for the first time in doing all of this, and I just have to give the guy, I don't remember his name, I'm sorry, I apologize, a shout out that came up after me. His dad was retired Air Force, and he come up afterwards and wanted to get a picture of him and I together. No one had ever asked me for a picture. So obviously very flattering. And then we all kind of made time to go over to a local restaurant so they could have further conversations in a more informal setting. And all of the panel went over there to make themselves available. So it was a very interesting. We're going to do it every 2 months. And so if you're interested in doing it, we had last time a guy drive down from Atlanta.
Well worth it. I agree. Well worth it.
So we got a lot of patriots here in Florida. I am going to the movie screening of the Badlands movie on the 22nd of April down near Naples. And Stormy Patriot Joe and CanCon, and I think Red Pill 78 is going to be there as well. So
that is, I wish I could be there. That because the guys have been talking about it, and I'm like, man, you guys are gonna have so much fun.
I'm telling you, Alpha, if you and I showed up at any venue, it'd be hands down crazy.
It would be, absolutely. Bring the shots. Alpha's ready to do a shot. Don't get any ideas, you guys. Alpha doesn't drink that crazy. So, and tequila scares me. Tequila, I had an experience. There's always a story. You want to know that story?
Everybody has a tequila story.
It's just like, oh man, yeah, my brain just went back somewhere. Good or bad, it went
Everybody
there.
has a tequila story.
You guys, I was telling the colonel that that's something people would have paid hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dollars to have the ability to interact, and so personal with a panel like that. So you guys, you got to go to the Colonel's channel. You got to subscribe. You got to follow her. All those links are down below, right below the description of the show. Follow and go. You don't want to miss that one. I'm all the way in California. If I was rich, I'd just get a jet, fly over there and be like, I'll be over there for that. Heck yeah. So, but I ain't going to be on the panel. I won't be in the audience. I want to enjoy it. You know what's interesting? And you do this now. I miss being able to enjoy watching podcasts. It's just, there's so much, and you guys know from the research, there's so much time that goes into preparing these things, editing these things, researching for these things, that it really pulls away from a lot of that, what I would consider, luxury time before, where I could watch a lot of the people. Now, granted, I do get to interact now with a lot of the people that I used to watch, but I also miss just being able to watch and listen as much as I used to. Now I tell a lot of my counterparts, hey, if you hit a show or a guest that's like, you got to hear this, send it to me, because when you just send me, hey, check out this show, it doesn't always hit the priority list. So you got to let me know, hey, got to watch this one. And so I appreciate that. But Colonel, we're in part 10. Set us up. What are we going to talk about today?
Okay, so I won't share all of our behind the mic conversation, but at the end of one of our preliminary at the beginning shows, Alpha mentioned the country of Guyana to me. And what was intriguing about him mentioning it is in all of the subset of Operation Gladio called Operation Condor that happened in South America, the one country that I had not come across was Guyana. And I'm like, well, that's kind of weird. Everybody else had a regime change that was orchestrated by Operation Gladio, Condor, out of School of Americas, who had trained the installed dictator. But I don't remember coming across Guyana. So I promised Alpha that I would go take that up and look into it and see if his gut instinct was dead on in having mentioned that. So one of the first things that came up, and I have some key search words, I want to read a quote to you. Colonel James Bo Gritz, Gritz. Anybody that had been in the Army or Special Forces recognizes his name. He's legendary. He's the one that trained the Special Forces that went into Jonestown after the massacre. Here's his quote. I think Jonestown incident was an extension of the, quote, in search of Manchurian candidate, unquote. I think those people were conditioned to act in certain ways and would have probably just moved from Montreal, where CIA mind control experiments were carried out under the direction of Dr. Ewan Cameron, to Guyana in this case. You look at Jim Jones' background carefully. He had a lot of intelligence contact there for doing exactly what he did. It escalated once they killed Congressman Leo Ryan. Basically, they had no other way to go. So they just tried to self-destruct the entire mission. And that means the death of hundreds of people. As I point out in the book, the medical examiner there made some startling statements, and we wouldn't even allow the bodies to be properly examined when they were brought back to the East Coast and turned in. So obviously it was a cover-up. Jonestown, I think, was an extension of the MK Ultra from the CIA, and there are probably other experiments going on, unquote. That's the first thing I found. So
what an opening thing to find. You're probably like, man, Alpha dodged a bullet.
Alpha dodged a bullet. And I came back and I told you that. So I thought we had covered this. We have not. So we're going to today. Because again, we have covered so much ground on this, and there are so many stories to tell. We could be doing this 2 years from now. Not that I want to, Alpha, so don't count on that. Right? Because like you, I miss my time of reading. And when you're reading to prepare for a show, it's very different than just reading. So anyway, Guyana is most known for, or Jonestown is most known for, the quote, drinking the Kool-Aid. If people are younger and they don't understand what that means, the story Americans were told when the massacre happened of this commune of cult people committed mass suicide by drinking cups of Kool-Aid laced with cyanide. That was the story we were told. And then came the saying, you're drinking the Kool-Aid, meaning you are believing something like a cult that has no rational thought process behind it. So it was used as a propaganda tool by the CIA, as in telling everybody you could dismiss people out of hand, like they did with the whole Laurel Canyon hippie. Well, you're just a hippie. You know, if you're anti-war, you're this. If you're a conspiracy theorist, you're just drinking the Kool-Aid. And it's not coincidental that all of these CIA operations come away with some element of a propaganda tool to be utilized in perpetuity by the CIA on the American public. And Guyana is that tool, and that's where drinking the Kool-Aid came from. So the actual massacre itself happened in November of 1978, November 18th to be specific. And it involved 913 men, women, and children that, quote unquote, drank the Kool-Aid. And, or so we were told. Supposedly they were told to do so by Jim Jones. And Jim Jones was a preacher of a quote unquote church cult called People's Temple. And we were told that it was a left wing, i.e. communist, right? Religious cult, which had established a settlement in Guyana that they were all part of. Upon looking into it deeper, it reveals a completely different story. Jim Jones was a CIA agent and had been for decades. He was involved in a mind control project coordinated by one of the U.S. Army's top chemical warfare specialists by the name of Dr. Lawrence Layton, Layton. Rather than a mass suicide, most of the parishioners were murdered. It appears in order to preserve the true nature of the Jonestown cult and Jones' connection to the CIA. If you pull up any of the pictures of the bodies, one of the points that they make is that if they had been poisoned with cyanide, it contorts the body in a way in which your muscles contract and leaves the corpse in a very odd, weird shape, and it distorts your face. Because there are actual pictures of people who have been poisoned with cyanide. These bodies were basically laid out, most of which look like they had been drug into place, and placed where they were, with the adult bodies placed over the children bodies, and almost like in rows, as if they were preparing the bodies to be discovered. But that is not where you see them laying, is not necessarily where they died.
I brought one on the screen right here so people can see.
Yeah. So interestingly enough, the Congressman Leo Ryan was one of the CIA's foremost congressional critics. And he had actually orchestrated legislation attempting to rein the CIA in. He was actually, and maybe that's why no congressman since has ever done that, because he was actually assassinated by the CIA in Guyana. So he was lured to Jonestown by one of Jones's accomplices under false pretenses. And when he was shot on the tarmac of the airport, he was standing next to the CIA station chief in Guyana.
Here's another image, just because the other one was zoomed in, but to just put it in perspective, how many people? I mean,
913.
That's just wild.
So 4 other members of his group was murdered that day, in addition to the congressman. And it was reported by some of the survivors that the armed men, and I'm going to tell you that they were Gladio operators, that did the assassination were like drugged. They themselves looked like zombies, it was reported. And there were people that did survive, that got away. They ran into the wooded area. Ryan ends up being the first and only congressman ever killed in the line of duty. He was killed with what's called untraceable dum-dum bullets. And the guy that shot him was dressed basically in a military garb, like what you would imagine the Gladio operators in the kind of combat BDUs. So the dum-dum bullets are basically outlawed by the Geneva Convention. You're not allowed to have them, but the CIA has a huge supply of them. And they were used for anti-Castro exile raids on Cuba and in the JFK assassination. So you see immediately linked to 2 other Gladio operations that we talked about with the exile Cuban population, which I've told you unequivocally was our Gladio operators out of Miami, and how Otto Skorzeny via the OAS was involved in the assassination of JFK. So you just tied the whole 3 events together just by the use of the ammunition. So you have another CIA critic during that time. His name was Mark Lane, and he basically was tricked into representing Jones, who claimed to have been a victim of CIA harassment when all along Jones was in the CIA. Lane visited Jonestown and narrowly escaped the massacre just days before he gave testimony about the JFK assassination. So they were planning on killing him too, because he was going to be a witness in the House Select Committee on Assassinations, tying everything together. Lane had been Marina Oswald's attorney and authored the book Rush to Judgment, which, among other things, contradicted the findings of the Warren Commission. Again, Gladio touches everything. Lane was discredited by his association with Jones, that he was basically set up, and his reputation and career was left in ruins in a coup for the CIA. That's how they dirty up these attorneys, just like the ones that they're trying to destroy that are representing the January 6th. These are, nothing they do is new. That's why understanding history so you can see the patterns is so important. When you look at the pictures of the dead bodies, you see that they're all facing down. They're carefully arranged. And I talked about the contortions that would happen if they had actually been exposed to cyanide at the level in which they were saying that they had been. So the coroner, that was the Guyana coroner, said that if that was the case, you would have only seen like the top of their head and the heels of their feet touching the ground, because their bodies would have been like shriveled up and contorted into a pattern that's not anything like what they look like. It was also noted by the coroner down there in his reports, which never was published up here, that many of the victims had blisters on the back of their neck at an injection site at the base of their neck, as if they had all been injected with something. So another guy by the name of Louis Gerbage ran a large detective agency in New Orleans, and whose daughter had died in the massacre, said that he saw guns at the scene of the massacre and evidence that the bodies had been drugged and then laid out. One man was obviously fighting someone off and died in that position, while others displayed signs of having been injected with a poison. Stanley Clayton, a witness who escaped the massacre, said that he observed a woman being forcibly held down and injected with a poison, and that when the mother refused to surrender the child, the armed guard murdered the children. Gerbage and Clayton's observations contradict all of the U.S. media reports from the time, which characterized it as a mass suicide. Further contradicting the claim of mass suicide, Mark Lane reported hearing heavy gunfire as he fled into the jungle with another temple attorney by the name of Charles Gary. Autopsies carried out by the Guyana chief medical examiner, Dr. Leslie Mutu, who worked for 32 straight hours in the jungle heat to try to take care of the bodies and label them and do all of the processing, originally determined the cause of death for at least 700s to be homicide, not suicide. That's the guy on the ground. Mutu observed puncture wounds at the back of the shoulders, like at the base of the neck, which indicated they had been forcibly held down and injected with a poison. No needles, however, were found at the scene, indicating that any needles may have been disposed of. The cyanide poisoning was found in bottles labeled Valium, as if there had been a switch of the material used or somehow combine the two. After Mutu carried out the investigation, the forensic specimens and samples that he had gathered were given to a representative in the American Embassy in Georgetown, which is the biggest city nearby, expecting that they would be forwarded to America's pathologist, but they were not. They disappeared and were never seen again. So they basically were destroyed. Right after that, many of the corpses were embalmed there before any autopsy. And as we have seen in all of these Gladio operations, whether it's Justice Scalia or any of these other things, the Pope that they did murder that had been poisoned in one of our very first Gladio shows that we talked about, he had been Pope for 32 days. He died on the morning of the 33rd day. from poisoning, and immediately against canon law was embalmed so that you can't have any documentation of what the actual cause of death was. It happens here again. And so I just call people's attention to patterns. When you start reading stories like this with your Gladio glasses on, you see the reoccurring patterns.
Well, we even saw that pretty recently when a certain pandemic hit.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So other bodies were left out to rot and decompose in the heat. And that would then make an autopsy impossible because the flesh had already started decomposing. The Army brought in cargo airplanes that had the capability of moving hundreds of bodies at a time. So there was no excuse for them to have been left out there, but they were. Identification bracelets that the coroners, the local coroner down there had worked meticulously to try to identify all of the bodies, had been removed, supposedly by a guy by the name of Robert Pastor. Pastor. He's the guy that gave the order to remove all the ID bracelets. His job was National Security Council Director of Latin American and Caribbean Affairs. Though Pastor denied giving this order, there were witnesses down there that said he very much did. He supposedly was working under the orders of the Brzezinski guy that was President Carter's national security advisor. So a study that was done by the New England Journal of Medicine found 6 leading medical examiners describing the handling of the body of the victims by the U.S. military and others as, quote, inept, incompetent, and embarrassing, only circumstantial evidence of probable cyanide poisoning, unquote, which basically means they doubted the entire narrative. And that was published fairly close to the time when all of this, but of course it was buried. The Los Angeles Times reported that 3 of the Jonestown dead were discovered in January of 1986, 8 years after the mass suicide, stacked in caskets inside a storage facility in Southern California.
What?
Yeah. Scott Hooker, a Green Beret who landed in Jonestown after the massacre, told Temple defector David Parker Wise that his mission was to kill any remaining survivors and inject their body with cyanide. He actually made an official statement that that's what he was told his mission was. Jim Jones' lover, Annie Moore, was shot and killed in Jones' cabin during this whole fiasco while retrieving valuables with CIA-issued dum-dum bullets like Ryan. And so it's almost like she was not injected, but someone felt that she was going to be a security risk and basically murdered her just outright. Didn't even go to the problems of making it look like she committed suicide. And maybe that was to send a message to somebody. Jeff Braley, a senior medic of the Joint Humanitarian Task Force who was sent to Guyana to recover the remains of the victims, said that he was approached by a man in civilian clothes he suspected to be CIA, who told him to guard a large box of documents that he needed to take to the U.S. Embassy and to shoot anyone who tried to move the box. Also highly suspicious was the fact that the CIA notified the Defense Department of the mass suicide at Jonestown at 3:29 a.m. when it was still dark outside and hours before the Guyanese Defense Forces arrived to even confirm anyone was dead. So you're sitting on the Joint Chiefs of Staff and you get a phone call saying, hey, we've got mass suicide, when no one's actually saw the bodies yet. Little sus. Just a little.
Teeny bit.
So timing indicates that a CIA agent present at Jonestown at the time of the massacre otherwise how can anyone explain how the CIA contacts the Joint Chiefs of Staff and tells them there's a bunch of dead bodies when nobody's been identified as dead yet? After the massacre, a secret tape was found where muffled voices could be heard in the period before the Guyanese security forces arrived, discussing news coverage about Jonestown in English, which is very odd. These could be the voices of American intel agencies or some other person like Gladio participating in a cover-up. Air Force Colonel L. Fletcher Prouty, and for those who don't know, he was the guy that worked on the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff in the position of the CIA liaison. And I need to clarify that for the audience. They have an office that for both the FBI and the CIA on the joint staff, because the military provides airlift and other forces for certain CIA and FBI missions. For example, there's an alert mission at Andrews Air Force Base for the emergency FBI team that goes to places like Waco or Oklahoma bombing or Oklahoma City bombing. And so they have to respond in 3 hours and get them out of town. So that cell on the Joint Chiefs of Staff is where Colonel Prouty actually worked. So he would have gotten the phone call from the CIA about the dead bodies and needing airlift to come get them, right? So this is him talking. He noted evidence of the involvement of a larger force in the operation. A quote, "The Joint Chiefs of Staff had prepared air shipments of hundreds of body bags. They didn't normally keep that many in one place. Within hours, they began to shuttle them down to Georgetown, the main city. They couldn't possibly have done that without prior knowledge that it was going to happen. It shows that there were planning." Prouty goes on to say, quote, "We would provide the agency with the things they were requesting without question. That's the way the business works," unquote.
You just gave me chills, Colonel, because I start thinking about, and this was before I ever, took the red pill. But once again, I said, my little brother's always been the conspiracy theorist. And he would show me all these prefabricated like coffins that FEMA had, at certain places in the United States, like spread out the United States, but like by the thousands. And now, I agree with these people, you start having that kind of preparation. What do you know that's coming?
Yes. So he says the chairman of the joint staff provided the body bags, the airlift, and all the rest on a timetable that showed advanced knowledge. Quote, "The Joint Chiefs of Staff wouldn't have moved at all on their own," unquote. Another quote, "They didn't give a damn about Jonestown. These are other unusual events," he noted, these and other unusual events are the kinds of earmarks that define in the hand of American intelligence involvement. So the autopsy of Jones' own body concluded that he did not take poison, but that he killed himself with a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. But it's almost like a Mark Middleton story. The pistol was found 200 feet from the body, and Jones was shot through his left side of the head, and he's right-handed. But there's a lot of people that even question whether or not it was his body, because he had a tattoo that didn't exist on the body that was claimed to be his. Just saying. So we're going to put a big fat question mark of whether or not he died. And that's all I'm going to say about that. Because his body just happened to be one of the ones that was left out in the heat to decompose. I'm
Right.
sure it's just a coincidence. So other researchers say that the People's Temple member from Great Britain, Phil Blakely, ran a special forces training camp at Jonestown in the mid-70s for mercenaries heading to Angola. One of the temple, and evidently the temple had its own navy. It had several ships that it brought supplies up. So prior to Jonestown being the Jonestown that you and I know about, it was a Gladio terrorist training camp for South America. Is that mind-boggling?
It's creepy. It's creepy.
Okay.
Because you know what I shared with you. That's why it's so creepy to me.
Oh, honey, it gets better. It gets better. So basically, when the Kool-Aid drinking got over, Jim Jones radioed Blakely to pick him up and his guards at the mouth of the river about 30 miles north of Jonestown in an uncoded radio message. A ship, which was impounded by authorities, briefly detained Blakely for questioning while they searched for Jones at the mouth of the river, not realizing that was exactly what Jones wanted them to do as he escaped overland to Venezuela, it is alleged. The Venezuelan Border Patrol revealed that they did observe a group of 30 to 40 people that were moving towards the Venezuelan government. And if you wouldn't mind, pull up a map of northern South America so people can understand what we're talking about here on where Guyana is and the fact that it is co-located. Because right now, in real world, Guyana has an issue with Venezuela. And Venezuela has an issue with Guyana because there's Gladio training camps in Guyana. That's the part they left out of the current events.
I'm bringing it up right now, just saving it real quick.
And I will tell you that when you're looking at Guyana, there's the northern point of Guyana. If you go south a couple hundred miles and east about half that much is where Jonestown was. So if you go to the very top is like Wani Point.
So I'll show an overview one first that shows South America to kind of put in perspective where Guyana is, so people can see North America, Mexico, and all that. And now I'll bring one up of.
Now, so if you go to go about 100 miles south from that very tippy top north point, and then about 50 miles to the west, that's where Jonestown is. Okay, so the part to the west that comes down southwest and then loops back in, Jonestown is kind of, maybe a quarter of an inch in from Venezuela, where the big fat part is that goes out to the left. Move your cursor up there and I'll tell you when you're on it.
See if that makes it a little easier.
Yes. Do you see the red mark? That's Jonestown, where that red mark is.
Very interesting.
Yes, exactly. All right. So let me get back to my notes.
You guys save all those recent headlines you heard with Venezuela and Guyana. Save those headlines. Download that stuff.
Okay. So, yeah, it's crazy how all of this ties into current events. So Leo Ryan, the guy that's assassinated the congressman on the ramp there, has an aide by the name of Joe Holsinger, Holsinger. He survived the ambush, believed that Jones faked his own death, but was then ambushed by CIA agents who disappeared in 3 boats that the temple had left in the waters off of Brazil. Holsinger noted, however, that the whole story is so mind-boggling that I'm willing to concede Jonestown escaped with the agents, since he was one. And Holsinger, I don't know that it dawned on him that at the time Jones was actually a CIA agent. I think he would have found it a lot easier to stomach the fact that happened had he known that. Brazil Also, Jones spent time in the leading up to Brazil's Gladio coup, Operation Condor coup, where they installed a dictator in Brazil. Jones was there in the lead up to the coup. He is said to have parked a whole bunch of money there. At the highlight of the church, Jones accrued over $1 billion with a B dollars through this church. He also said that the more he investigated the mysteries of Jonestown, this is Holsinger talking, the more I'm convinced that there was something sinister behind all of it. Jones' last tape transcribed by the FBI, he can be heard amid people screaming in the background saying, "Get Dwyer out of here before something happens to him." Dwyer happened to be Richard Dwyer, the deputy chief of missions at the U.S. Embassy, who was the CIA agent involved in all of this. Dwyer worked for the U.S. Foreign Services in Egypt and Syria, and subsequently went to Grenada. And if you look at the timing of when he was in all of those areas, he's very suspect for Operation Gladio activities as well, especially in Grenada, which of course is where we invaded there too. He actually was part of the CIA effort to prepare for our invasion in Grenada. He also served in Thailand with the U.S. ambassador to Guyana during the Jonestown massacre. That U.S. ambassador to Guyana was John Burke, who was described by the CIA whistleblower Philip Agee as having worked for the CIA since 1963. In 1963, he was in Saigon, which is, of course, where we had Operation Phoenix, which was the drug running and the entire CIA exploitation of all of the people as part of the whole Operation Gladio in Vietnam. So every single one of these people that are present on the Jonestown campus down there has deep ties to Operation Gladio programs in a number of different countries.
You know what's interesting, and I'll bring it up real quick because you said campus, and I'll do a drawing of a bird's eye view of the actual like camp facility here, and then here's more of a three-dimensional, I guess, kind of depiction of it. But when you look at it, you know, you have the living quarters at the top end, you have medical unit at the far left, you have the family cottages to the right, the far. I look at this and it resembles to me like a military base.
All right, so keep that in mind, because what's not shown on that particular map, that was the actual Jonestown map for the MK Ultra experiments. In those wooded areas that you see in that background was the bivouac Gladio camp. There's actually, we go into it a little bit, but there's actually two actual camps there. The one that they had used prior to them bringing the cult down there was the roughed in bivouac. They brought them there to hone their wooded skills of doing basically like you and I know about bivouac, you know, camping out for 2 weeks, going through all of the drills and stuff like that. It's very rudimentary. And then after they got that camp up and running to train Operation Condor gladiators, if you will, they worked on the actual camp where they're going to locate this cult down there for the scientific, psychological so they basically were going to host a full up and running terrorist training camp, psychological operations, all in one area.
And I think I'm going to pull this up because you can let me know if this is an actual photograph. I really hope this saves because it has a box and I'm not sure if that's the area you're talking about. So let me see. Yeah, okay. It looks like I can bring it up.
Yeah.
So off to the far right, it shows a little, like a boxed area around the woods. And then at the top of that, it says Piggery Chicken. There's an arrow pointing towards like another area behind the woods in the very, very top right of the Jonestown.
Yep. That's it. So you have a full up and running Operation Gladio experiment going on there. And so basically they've confirmed through these radio transmissions that you have a CIA agent on the ground. Dwyer had accompanied Leo Ryan, the congressman, for his 2-day visit to the compound and appears to have been the one to send the mysterious cable at 9 p.m. on November 18th, reporting that Ryan and his entourage's death at the airstrip. So he had to have been there. Information that the State Department did not have until the next morning. In later court proceedings, the Justice Department attorneys kept Dwyer from being questioned, for national security reasons. And in order to understand how this all unfolded, it's very important, and I'm going to draw some other Operation Gladio corollaries so people can see how, while these missions could in fact stand on their own, they don't. And the overlapping of people and their backgrounds is enough to make your entire head blow up. So Jim Jones grew up in Indiana. His mother worked, she's college educated, normal, worked in an assembly plant as most people did in the 40s and 50s in Indiana. His father was a lot older than the mom, and he had gotten sick in World War I. And Jim Jones, aggravatingly enough, graduated from Indiana University. And for those who don't know, so did I. So that was kind of disgusting. But he was very smart. He actually went on to study law at Butler University, which is a very expensive university. And so you wonder, how did he get, his mom's working in a factory, his dad's disabled. How do you get the money, number one, to go to Indiana University? Because it's very expensive. And then number two, to go on to law school at Butler. And for those who don't know, Butler's a private school and it's very, very expensive. So makes you think that maybe somebody's funding him, especially given his life later on. He gets involved in a local Pentecostal church, and this Pentecostal church is seated in a primarily Black working class neighborhood. Those of us who've studied Operation Gladio and this MK Ultra thing knows that they love experimenting on primarily minority populations. So I'm not at all surprised where this church gets planted, because immediately he starts doing this kind of snake oil salesman, like using chicken livers to pretend like they're cancers, and he's pulling them out of people, that kind of corny garbage. And the rolling around on the floor, all of these crazy antics that goes on in his church, like he's going to raise the dead. And I mean, that it's that over the top that's going on. So understanding that the people that are attracted to this type of preaching, it is believed by these psychologists that they are going to be ones that would be easier to transition into a cult for experimentation than a average church. So you can see this evolving. And so he is very outspoken. And in Indiana at the time, which was basically the head of the Ku Klux Klan, for most of this period of time when he's developing this, he's all about interracial marriages and all of this stuff. So you know that it would be very controversial in the environment in which he's setting this up in. And people believe that this was on purpose to get people who are rebelling against the system. So psychologically, he's aiming for specific people as he's developing this ministry, which of course is easy to see when you're looking back, not necessarily easy to see when you're in the midst of it, because we're talking about the mid 1950s. These were things that were not done at that time. So,
you sent me back to a memory from second grade. It was either the second half of first grade, or it was second grade for me. It was the elementary school. If anybody wants to look it up, it was called Van Buren School. Very, very minority, very, very poor elementary school that I went to. And this could be a whole nothing, but you were you know me, Kern, I always trust my intuition and my gut. And when you were talking about that, when you specifically mentioned how we know they like to do the MK Ultra, like on the minorities. So this story, and I'll have to ask my mom to get even more clarification, but what I do remember, because I got in trouble, is they brought these things, and they almost kind of looked like RVs, you know, or like tractor trailers. They brought to the school, and it was supposed to be to check all the kids for head lice. But, you know, they, in the morning, like one set of class goes, another set of class goes. But I remember one of my friends had a Band-Aid on their finger. And when I went and asked, and they told me that they had got their finger poked. Now, as a child, I was deathly afraid of needles.
What?
Yeah, you know, like, you know, when they just do the little poke.
No, I know.
Yeah. And
you're
so
taking head lice and you get your finger pricked.
So that's why I want to find out. I want to see if my mom, it's hard to kind of talk to her now because her speech is still recovering from the stroke. But when I saw that they got poked, I was like, oh, hell no, Alpha's not getting poked. So there was this, kids were different back then. There was this softball area, like field. And I went out there and I just started playing, you know, and I specifically remember I started looking for I got distracted and started looking for 4-leaf clovers. So when my class went, they can't find Alpha. I don't even actually think they were looking for me. So finally, when they did recess and to go back out there, and then I start playing, the teacher sees me. And so she's like, where were you? So that's when I get sent to the principal's office because the little trailer place had already left. So I get sent to the principal's office. They call my mom and they're just like, I don't think they used the word ditch back then, but you know, he missed this, you got to take him to a doctor now to get his head lice checked or something like that. And so anyways, my mom takes me home. First grade, second grade, Alpha got a little trouble, everybody. But it was preservation, guys. It was self-preservation. But I remember,
MK Ultra.
Well, I remember in the principal's office, this I do remember. I remember they're telling me it was just head lice. And I remember telling my mom, like, no, some of my friends, their fingers got poked. I didn't want to get poked. And they're like, no, this was head lice. Now, granted, you're talking many, many, many moons ago. But I remember that a couple of my friends had the Band-Aids on their finger because they got poked. And I remember telling my mom, like, this is the reason I went and hid in the desert. Like, I care if they comb through my hair. Like, I was a boy, like, I'm curious. I'm real curious to go back and because my mom has all the yearbooks, to go back and find those kids and so just start looking up names. Just start looking up names and see. But because as far as I'm aware, why would you have to do the finger prick?
Alpha's going to open his own detective agency now.
So okay, listen, because this is where my brain's working ahead of you guys. When I got into middle school, there was a kid by the name of Kevin Aarons, right? And I went with him. We grew up, I don't remember because there's a lot to this story because initially I was going to a different elementary school. I was going to John F. Kennedy. That was the elementary school I was at. But then I told them where I lived from another funny story. And they were like, you're not supposed to be going to the school because my parents were trying to get me to go to the good elementary school. And then that's how I ended up going to Van Buren. And that happened halfway through first grade. So people are wondering why I was using that time frame. But I had a friend by the name of Kevin Aarons. Later on, a few years after high school, he gets into that kind of like what we talked about last week, like the 9 angles kind of thing, but it wasn't called that. But he gets into that satanic occultism, and he ends up killing a cop, a Riverside County Sheriff's deputy, who it was Deputy Bruce Lee, right? Not Bruce Lee the actor, but Bruce Lee the deputy.
I remember when he was killed.
And it's just one of those things where I don't know. Maybe I'm reaching for the stars here, but it just makes me kind of curious. Is, symbolism and names and all this stuff, and it's like, you had this happen to these young kids. You have this one kid who's just a good kid. I remember liking him. Very artistic. Goes into this occultism. Then end up bashing in this deputy's head and kills him, whose name also happens to be Bruce Lee, like the famous Bruce Lee. I don't know, but that's Alpha's brain just went way out there because
we're not even to the good part yet, Alpha.
Oh man.
So while he's setting this church up in Indiana, mysteriously, all of the church financial assistance comes from the federal government. They're giving grants to create jobs, to run soup kitchens. There's money for poverty programs, because of course he's in a minority neighborhood, and basically kind of giveaways to entice people to come into the church initially. So he gains all of these followers. And then of course, all of the stuff that he's doing with this interracial stuff is used to bait the headquarters of the KKK, conveniently located where he sets all of this up, into bashing him and bringing out and creating this white supremacy narrative that basically creates him as the savior of civil rights and builds him up an even bigger platform. This entire thing is orchestrated, by the way. Jones starts hyping on the impending race war that's coming. And remember, that's tied to the whole Laurel Canyon, that Nazi compound that they did out there, that guy supposedly did because there was going to be a Nazi race war. This is all being done around the same time frame. This is 100% manipulated. And they use that to attract more Blacks and other minorities to this church, because it's going to be the savior from them going into concentration camps like they created for the Japanese during World War II. So in 1965, Jones moves the People's Temple out to California, and basically did so under the guise that, he was under attack there. But I have to mention, just put a footnote here, that a childhood friend from elementary and junior high of the area in Indiana that he's from grows up to be a police chief. We're going to come to him in a minute, but I'm going to put this as a footnote here. Because he goes off to South America mysteriously too for a completely different CIA mission. So just keep that in mind. So this attack of saving the minorities and everything from the KKK and moving his church kind of gives him bona fides as this kind of savior type guy. After he gets out there, he begins to basically, in many ways, what people would refer to as psychological torture these people in the church, where he's showing them movies that are actual real film that happened during the Vietnam War, where the CIA tortures people and basically tells them that that's basically what the government is going to do to them. That's what they did over in Vietnam. So basically exposing them to psychological trauma. The People's Temple, once it got to California, took in ex-cons, drug addicts, emotionally disturbed people from the local psychological hospital, wayward youth, and others considered social deviants. Again, we're going to have this whole hodgepodge of people to psychologically experiment on. 60 to 80% of the churchgoers were Black, drawn to Jones' evangelistical style. In 71, let's see. So they offer night courses in socialism and training in guerrilla warfare for the upcoming revolution or race war. Jones developed, and that ties in, of course, to the terrorist training camp in Guyana, but they're not in Guyana yet. Jones developed ties to Angela Davis and the Black Panther Party, Huey Newton. People's Temple services were attended by celebrities like Jane Fonda, Tom Hayden, along with political refugees from Chile after the 1973 CIA-backed coup where they overthrew Allende, who himself was more a socialist kind of guy. And let's see, Laura Cole, Kohl, joined the temple at age 22 after having been tear gassed for protesting the Vietnam War and working with the Black Panthers. She attended the 1969 Woodstock Festival and basically said that the temple offered her the community that she had been looking for, and that it gave the appearance of accepting all races, blah, blah, blah. And she said that she had already went through a failed marriage and she was just kind of looking for the safety of a commune. So while providing a home for the 1960 idealist, the People's Temple took on cult-like qualities, with Jones being the master manipulator. And people back in Indiana, when they went back and asked about him, said he was a gangster that used a Bible instead of a gun. So it says that Jones was not out for the money, but the power over others. He did all kinds of weird sex crap with these people too. He had slept with almost every woman in the church there. Others accused him of rape later on, that it was not necessarily consensual. He ran his own blackmail scheme because all of these politicians, to include Governor Jerry Brown, would frequent his church and parties and commune events, and where they were supplied with underage and women in general. And they would film them, and he used it for blackmail. All of this is going on while it's in California.
Sounds like Epstein.
It does. There are so many of these. They ran a welfare scam where they took in, like from halfway houses, Black children on welfare, and then basically stole their money from the local Oakland area. And the government of California even assigned the Temple Church, designated them as a foster home. They put children in this environment, and they knew that they were using them as underage sex targets. So a lot of this was known, and people left the cult, but weirdly enough, a lot of the people ended up dead when they left the church because they didn't want them exposing what was going on inside the church. So, but nothing was ever done. The FBI was all aware of this. The local police was aware of this. And let's see. So again, he was involved with Willie Brown, who attended the parties there. Angela Davis, Albert Einstein, not Albert Einstein. He was compared to Albert Einstein, weirdly enough. Jones forged friendships with Marvin Dimley, who happened to be the lieutenant governor at the time, Harvey Milk, an openly gay man elected to public office back then, Governor Jerry Brown, we mentioned, San Francisco Mayor George Moscone, and let's see.
Well, you're looking for that name, just so people, if you guys ever see my eyes wander off screen, I'm looking up some of these things that the Colonel brings up, or I try to find some of these names to, put a picture or put a location, to optically, kind of stimulate us as we get educated here. But also come across articles that I'll be looking at. And they did the 45th anniversary of the Jonestown massacre. They did it at a cemetery in East Oakland. And the name of the cemetery is Evergreen. And for any of you guys out there that's study a certain board, there's a name that's referenced that talks about watch Evergreen. And, there's all kinds of multiple meanings. I just find it very interesting on a topic like this, that there's just that, I don't use the word coincidence anymore, that kind of synchronicity taking place. And so I'll give it back to you,
right.
I'll give it back to you.
So also he met with First Lady Rosalind Carter, and at a rally in San Francisco, he met with Vice President Walter Mondale. So this is just, I want to tell you the circles in which this guy participated. So in 1978, it was determined that he had over $1 billion in offshore bank accounts in various places in the world. But like I was telling you, this is where Leo Ryan started honing in on these reports of the wealth and him hanging around with all these politically connected people and these sex parties and the foster care thing. So he's looking into all of that. That's what prompted the move to Guyana. And the People's Temple had purchased that land down there much earlier, several years earlier. And they went down, they cleared the land for where they were going to put the compound for these people. But like I told you, they had the bivouac thing as well. And it said that the area, there's a weird thing about a prophet that had talked about this land in Guyana, where they set this whole compound up. So it's like already kind of a spooky place, like a mystic kind of connotation where it's located in the local folklore of Guyana. And so it says that Jones' connection to the CIA was apparent in the development. They had sophisticated intelligence gathering and a filing system that mirrored the exact same CIA network that was set up at other locations throughout South America that tied this Jonestown to the CIA specifically, because it was like wired to the max, almost like somebody was watching their experiments. Within the files that were located there, like the ones that were in the box that the guy was told to shoot anybody that tried to take the box, there was information on each member of the temple, and it included personal dossiers as to where they worked, what kind of medical attention they had gotten, psychological profiles, and pictures during the entire time they had been associated with the church. During the blackmail part of it, while they were still in California, they were asked to sign blank forms that could be used for documenting sex acts. So they would say, hey, they asked them to sign forms saying, like I raped a child, or I had homosexual sex with so-and-so. And those would then be put in their files for blackmail purposes later on in case they left the cult. But some of them were also asked to file blank ones so they could write in the crime. And people did it.
Don't drink the Kool-Aid.
Don't drink the Kool-Aid. One of Jones' top aides, a Patty Cartmell, Cartmell, and her assistant was skilled in burglary techniques. And they would actually, while they were still in California, break into people's homes and steal compromising material from them. This is literally a no kidding crime syndicate posing as a church. Jones' recruitment as an intel agent had occurred much sooner than any of this, because this is in the 1970s. They anticipate he was in the CIA as early as 1951, where he was attending political meetings and people look back on it now and estimate that's about the time that he was recruited. And I mentioned to you, this is the part where we get to his relationship with this other guy that turns out to be the chief of police. Let me get to that guy's name. In a Freudian slip, Jones once told a Swedish journalist, "All my thoughts are coming from the CIA." Jones' purpose was to channel the activist energy in the radical 1960s movements into his cults and discredit those ideas, according to him, and to use Jonestown as a cover-up for CIA training programs and unethical medical experiments. The U.S. Embassy in Georgetown, which housed the Guyana CIA station, regularly supplied Jones with reports of congressional investigations into Jonestown. State Department concealed much of the information from Leo Ryan about the Jonestown group, exemplifying the close symbiotic relationship between Jones, the U.S. Embassy, and the State Department, which provided cover for the CIA. And as we've always said, the covert side of the CIA came out of the Office of Policy Coordination in the State Department. They didn't even change the name when they put it initially over in the CIA, nor did they change the person. Frank Wisner, Wisner, was the guy that ran it at the State Department. He came over with the entity and it was embedded in the CIA. There is no difference between the State Department and the CIA. They are in bed together. So people just need to know that. Jones' relationship went back, as we said, to the late 50s, early 60s. He played a role in at least 3 of the agency's projects. In 1961, the Bay of Pigs landing, the racial revolution in British Guyana, which is located just to the east of the Guyana we were just looking at on the map, and in the 1964 military coup in Brazil, which I had already mentioned. So he was involved in all 3 of those incidences. In February 60, just before the triumph of Fidel Castro and the Cuban Revolution, Jones visited Havana ostensibly to recruit Black Cubans to his church and to set groundwork for his future expansion into Latin America or experimentation. Curiously, Jones later showed off a picture of a mangled body of a pilot, indicating that Jones had witnessed the pirate bombing of the cane fields in the Bay of Pigs, like he was actually there during some of the fighting. Jones also had a photo of him and his wife posing with Fidel Castro. One of the researchers into this speculates that Jones' visit may have been to help encourage immigration from Cuba in order to embarrass the Castro government, a project in which conservative religious groups collaborated. I don't believe that part. It's speculation, could be, could not be, but that's not consistent with all of the other stuff that he was involved in, because he was involved in revolutionary activity. And it's very likely that's why he was there, because it's obvious he was there during some of the revolutionary fighting. In 1961, Jones went to British Guyana with the purpose of helping the CIA overthrow the socialist government of Chede Hagen, a Marxist dentist. He led the Marxist dentist led the independence movement against the bigger, because all of Guyana used to be under the, they were a colony of Great Britain, just so everybody knows that. Some of it stayed aligned, which is what the British Guyana part is. Some of that stayed aligned with the UK. The Guyana that we're talking about broke off and became completely independent of the UK. So Guyana was strategically important to the US back at that time because of a substance called borax, Bauxite, and because the US had an Air Force base, which it had acquired from Britain, where Air Force officers carried out all of the mapping of the entire area of South America. So it was a big base down there that they were doing a lot of reconnaissance. And of course, back at that time, that was very important for the international syndicate, because that's how they determined where the forests were, where the resources were. There's certain things that you can get by mapping, like mountains, and certain land indications of what types of minerals are in lands underneath the land based on how the mountains are created, like the different where the plates meet and all of that other stuff. And so this geo mapping project before satellites was very, very important for the international syndicate to know, to go in and know what countries they were going to overthrow and exploit for their resources. So in 61, there is a picture of Jones giving a anti-communist speech where he blamed the affluent Guyanese clergy for bleeding the wealth of the people. In other words, he's down there spewing the anti-communist rhetoric, which is how, keep in mind, the Gladio back in that day, in the late 50s and early 60s, affected the overthrow of governments through elections. They would get people, they would send in like the Antifa agitators, if you will. And that's basically what they portend Jim Jones was basically doing. And he started organizing all of the labor and everything in the British held Guyana in order to institute riots to then overthrow the government. So again, country number two, coup number two that he's involved in, working for the CIA. Jones' immediate supervisor was CIA agent Richard Welch, who, weirdly enough, goes on to get assassinated in 1970s while he's the CIA station chief in Greece, which is right before this Jonestown massacre. Isn't that weird? So one guy that would know that he's a CIA agent gets knocked off in Greece during their coup. And by the way, Welch, so the death of Leo Ryan got Congress all up in arms about, they were going through the assassination thing and exposing the CIA. Well, do you know what happened as a result of all of that? Zero, because this Welch guy gets knocked off, and most people believe it was by the CIA that he got knocked off, because as soon as he died, the CIA turned around and told Congress it was all their fault for digging into the CIA. They exposed him, which they did not. And they made it unsafe overseas for CIA agents. So they needed to sit down and shut up. And of course, Congress did exactly that and dropped the entire thing. And no one was ever held accountable for Leo Ryan's death. So Richard Welch's death was a twofer. It got rid of him and his corporate knowledge of the role he played in developing Jim Jones in the CIA. And it also, he was the martyr for the CIA to tell Congress to shut up.
And to add to it, it says, as a result of all that, they're like, you know, you can't let a tragedy go to waste. And this comes from Wikipedia. Outraged by Agee's actions, Congress passed the Intelligence Identities Protection Act, right, 1982, which criminalized the disclosure of identities of CIA agents. So it was a twofer plus.
No, that was a threefer then.
Yeah, there you go. Wow.
I forgot about that. You're right. Absolutely, Alpha. That was in the aftermath of getting Congress to shut up. They went one step further and passed that. Yeah, which of course then plays into the Valerie Flume, you know, exposure and how they got all caught up in that too. So yeah, that's all in the same bellywick there. Okay, so now where we are, we've got the deal in Guyana, and let's see, Jones, that's still talking about, I made a bunch of notes about the Guyana and Burns' relationship. I thought I had some notes about him in Brazil too. Let me just look down through here real quick.
Well, we're connected. We're connected. So while you're doing that, I'll just bring on the screen. Because you mentioned Brazil a few times. I'm listening to this, you know, the People's Temple, and it reminds me of a really good friend of Oprah Winfrey's. That name is Joa Texia de Fraria, but people may know them as John of God. And that was out of Brazil. And I'm just, as I'm hearing you talk about, Guyana and Jonestown, the People's Temple, like this dude just chipping at the back of my head to be like, huh, because it's such similar stuff, with the brainwashing, the MK Ultra stuff, the occultism, the sexual rapes of all the women. It's just,
and that the John of God guy was the baby farmer, right? He was impregnating all of those women and basically selling the babies.
I did not know that part.
Oh, what? That's what he went to. He's like serving 99 years in jail for that.
I knew all the sexual things with the women. I just didn't realize that there were babies being farmed as a result of that. That is just,
the whole purpose of raping the women was to impregnate them to produce babies to sell. So don't, whatever you do, research baby farms. Because once I came across him, I made the mistake of actually looking at baby farms. Do you know that baby farming is a multi-billion-dollar industry in Ukraine?
I remember you telling me that. I do.
Yeah. And there are countries that do that in Africa. And weirdly enough, where they do that, they seem to have a lot of bioweapons labs, almost like they're experimenting. So I don't know that, but there is a correlation. Look up bioweapons labs, baby farm overlap. Scary as hell. But yeah, that's what John of God was doing. He had a baby farm. The woman that was a model from Argentina that became a whistleblower and it exposed him was assassinated.
You know what? There was so much focus on the R word, because I know YouTube doesn't like it all, grape without the G.
Yeah.
There was so much push on that with John of God that I didn't even pick up the baby farming thing. And I'm sure that's by design.
And that's what Jeffrey Epstein was setting up in New Mexico, right? That was one of the big headlines, is his estate out there was going to be set up to do exactly the same thing. He was going to impregnate a bunch of women and basically farm babies.
And for those that want to know more about that location, and go research a show that I did several months ago last year with the gentleman by the name of Sean Taylor, and where our investigations kind of started to cross paths. And you'll see a lot of these locations, not just Jeffrey Epstein, but John McAfee and all these other people that are all in the vicinity of each other. They're all usually next to rivers and small scale airports. And you start to,
you mean like Georgetown and Jonestown in Guyana?
Exactly like that.
Okay. So back to Brazil and Jones. So Jones moves to, after he gets done with all his Guyana initial crap of setting up the terrorist training camp, overthrowing the British part of the Guyana network, and getting in bed with the actual government of the Guyana that we looked at, to be able to control the environment down there using the CIA so he can eventually move his cult and experiments down there. He moves on to Brazil for the CIA. And he basically was funneling money to dissident factions of the Brazilian military to prepare them for a coup that the CIA was going to effect. And from 61 to 64, Brazil was ruled by a guy by the name of Goulart, which they describe as a social democrat who officials in Washington said was giving positions and opportunity to extremists. Of course, they use the communist word, which just means for our purposes, someone that's outside of their control, that they didn't like, and that might just ask the Soviets for weaponry if the U.S. Didn't give them something because the U.S. wanted something in return they were unwilling to give. That's how you earn the label of communist, not because you're actually a communist. And that was a news flash to me in researching Operation Gladio. So when you hear somebody being labeled as a communist in the past, you have to actually dig down to find out whether or not they were a true living Marxist kind of government control everything, or they were just somebody that the State Department and the administration in the U.S. was pissed off at. Very different.
And he said
they used the same word for it.
And his last name was, if you could spell it one more time.
Goulart.
Okay, so I wanted to make sure it was the right guy. So first name of Joe Ale.
Joao.
Okay, yes, it's the right guy.
Okay.
It's
so
coincidences. That's here. I'll bring it on the screen so people can see. So we're talking about this gentleman right here. And so you see his first name, and then let me go back to someone we're just talking about a second ago. They got the same first name. Maybe it's just something cultural that's out there. I don't know, but it was enough for me to point it out. I'll just leave it there.
Okay. So in 1964, general strikes coordinated by the CIA and their cutout called the American Institute for Free Labor Development. The Brazilian generals basically overthrow Goulart and established a military regime that then stayed in existence for 20 years, which was horrific for the Brazilian population because it was the typical, what do you call it? Repressive regime that basically disappeared people, tortured people, it was horrific for the Brazilian people. So Jones used the cover of working at a laundromat, yet people observed who were later interviewed about him that he worked for a company called Invesco, Invesco, which was a known CIA cutout to house criminals and covert activity of their agents in countries. And he also just so happens to drive a State Department car, like it's registered to the embassy. And he stayed in a apartment that was known to house embassy personnel. And basically the people laughed, saying that he didn't even bother to disguise the fact that he was working for the CIA because of staying in the consulate provided places, that he received food from the US Embassy on a regular basis, blah, blah, blah. So there was no doubt in anybody's mind that he was in Brazil for the coup. So again, I want to make sure that everybody understands that he unequivocally worked for the CIA prior to the JONESTOWN massacre. So Jones was exposed in print as a CIA operative by a local newspaper, which accused him of filtering money to the military officers to finance the 1964 coup. The reporter wrote that, quote, "We know this flamboyant American is CIA," unquote. Jones refuted the charges by telling the reporter that his money came from his pension as a retired U.S. military officer, although he had never served in the military. And it's not like CIA agents don't lie. So remember I told you to keep that little door open about his childhood friend that was the Richmond chief of police. That guy's name is Dan Mitteroni, Mittrione. He was a CIA agent after he retired as the chief of police, and he worked under the cover of USAID. Now, just sit down and listen to the name that he worked under, because you're going to die when I tell you what he did. The name of his office at USAID was Office of Public Safety. And you think to yourself, well, he was a cop. That makes sense, right? That would be police protection. He's going to go down to South America after he retired as the chief of police and offer some of his expertise on, coaching the new dictatorial governments the CIA installed there, who would be very interested in policing correctly as they disappear people, not. So he happened to have been a Navy veteran, and let's see, Mitterrand coincidentally also worked in Brazil during that same time that Jones was there, in the lead up to the coup. Jones told his followers about Mitterrand, whom he referred to as a cruel person, even as a kid. And he had labeled him a racist. And in true hindsight, so was Jones. He just disguised it because he's experimenting on all of these minorities. This statement may have been part of Jones' cover to appear like he's being persecuted by the CIA, but they were very good friends. This Mitterrand guy ends up in Uruguay after the dictator was installed by the CIA there, and he begins torturing all of the people that don't want the CIA installed dictator in charge. So I'm going to call them freedom fighters. So this guy rounds up all the leaders of the freedom fighters, this chief of public safety for the USAID. He teaches the people in Uruguay how to torture them by putting electrodes on their private parts and to torture them without necessarily leaving marks for the higher ups, and then basically how to kill people and torture them to get them to rat on their neighbors and then eventually kill them. So he's repeatedly done this in the service of the Uruguayan dictator. But then the locals find out he's picking up homeless and disabled people and doing this. They start doing experiments on homeless people and disabled people. And that was a step too far. All of the freedom fighters in all of Uruguay get together and they decide they're going to kidnap this guy and they kill him.
Oh, I don't feel sorry for him. Jeez.
No, I don't either. But that was Jones's childhood friend. They went to elementary school together. They went to junior high school together. They both end up in the CIA and they both end up in South America doing CIA stuff.
You know, Colonel, this gave me an unsettling feeling. Law enforcement, we know, are homeless people. You know, you have the weird ones that kind of, we call them the passer-throughs. You know, they kind of come, they're there, and then they leave. But then you have your homeless that are, you know, they're there for a while. You know who these people are. Like, so-and-so lives under that bridge, and so-and-so lives in that desert. Like, and then every now and then, like, they're just gone. Well, because I come from a place of a good heart, sometimes I just always thought, well, just maybe they went back to their family, or, you know, maybe they just, something changed in their life and they didn't want to look at no more. But now when I think back through, you know, common sense, hindsight common sense is, no, these people weren't in a good place. So how would they have done that? How would those communications taken place looking back? And now part of me just wonders if
how
they're still
picked up to be experimented on.
Yeah.
And I will tell you, I unequivocally believe that's exactly why nobody wants to get rid of the homeless problem, because the homeless problem provides them a source of bodies. I'm 100% at this point convinced that's why we have a homeless problem. It is unconceivable at this point, with the billions of dollars spent on it, that it's not resolved.
And that's, man, you just give me
our drug problem.
you're giving me a lot of clarification, because one of the problems that I always had, I was like, why are we creating these NGOs that come into our communities locally, and they provide a place for, hear me out, people, before you think, oh, Alpha's cold-hearted. They build a place where they can come get a hot meal, get, some hygiene stuff if they choose it, but they can only go in this certain time window, and then they're out. And there's so many of these that, yes, I get that inherently sounds like a good thing. But when you see the money that's invested in this stuff, I'm like, with all of those, because it's not like there's multiple things like this. You could have built an entire apartment complex with that and just provided them homes, and then just created a work program for them.
So you started off about talking about the churches. In the America of the old days, churches dealt with homeless people, and they demanded accountability. They demanded you learn a skill. They would put you in the electrical guy or the plumber guy's business and demand accountability from you. If you are going to get a handout from your fellow people in this city, you are going to go to work here. You're going to learn a skill. By doing what we have done and putting this entity inside the government to hand out charity, you now have an entire governmental structure that benefits from the problem. If the government benefits from the problem's never going to go away. That's the exact same thing with Operation Gladio's role in the drug networking. As long as the government is funding covert operations with the drug market's never going to go away.
And now
it's not rocket science.
And now introduce human trafficking, and it's the same thing.
Exactly. There's so many evil parts that are downriver of that simple concept. You put the responsibility back on the non-infiltrated churches, and you give them the responsibility for policing their communities. This shit stops. It stops overnight, because people will not tolerate lazy, irresponsible people taking their resources without giving something back to the community. It just doesn't happen. But the government that thrives on it will never go away. So anyway, that's my soapbox. So interestingly enough, after Matroni is murdered in Uruguay, Jones's CIA file instantly disappears. The speculation inside the CIA as a result of that is that Matroni, let me just clarify something too. There was a lot of people in Chile, Paraguay, Uruguay, Brazil during all of the CIA installed dictatorships that were disappeared. The people were taken, they were tortured somewhere in a different country, and they either killed them, whatever. They never showed up again to their family. There were speculations in the CIA that terrorist training camp that was co-located with the Guyana, Jonestown, was one of the locations where these people were taken and tortured. And so the speculation when Jones's file, this is not proven, it's completely speculation. When Jones's file did, that's not speculation, disappear inside of the CIA, that it was because he was tied to joint CIA operations. We know they were together in Brazil, but there was speculation that as Matroni was picking these people up in Uruguay, and there was a corollary to him in every dictator country. He wasn't the only one. He was just the one for Uruguay. They had a CIA guy in Chile. They had a CIA guy in Brazil. They had a CIA guy in Paraguay. All of them that they overthrew had the same guy. But they speculate that because of their childhood friendship and had known that he was bringing his disappeared people to that terrorist training camp at Jonestown for the torture techniques, and that if that Matroni guy was traced back to Jim Jones before they got rid of the MK Ultra experiment co-located with Georgetown, that it would get exposed prematurely. So they believe that's the reason why Jim Jones's CIA file was disappeared. So one of the primary sources or destinations of the people that were trained at Jim Jones's terrorist training camp was Angola. And that's a whole nother story. So let's see. The land to establish the training camp for the mercenaries was headed, we mentioned earlier, by a guy by the name of Phil Blakely, who was basically from a British wealthy family. Excuse me. Blakely had come to America after meeting at a boarding school and then marrying Deborah Layton. And Layton, remember, is the name of her dad, is the psychologist that was over the medical MK Ultra program at Jonestown in Guyana. So his daughter, Deborah Layton, meets this Blakely guy, and he basically is working the terrorist training camp while his wife's dad's working the MK Ultra side of the camp. Also involved, CIA agent Frank Terpil, Terpil, admitted to a BBC interviewer that he supplied mercenaries and arms to the early stages of Jonestown in the 1970s, when the jungle camp was used as a CIA training center. And I got to tell you, just like you have had experiences when I deliver some of this explosive, when I read that one sentence, they haven't admitted to a BBC reporter, CIA agent, that was the one that supplied the arms to the terrorist training side of the camp that was used as a CIA training center. My brain went, Operation Gladio. Jim Jones, Jonestown was a Gladio training site. And they admitted it. They just don't use that word. So Guyana residents remember 200 khaki-clad Black Americans as they frequented the Georgetown bars and whorehouses while on leave from their assignment from that base. Many of the weapons that were smuggled into Jonestown amid the personal possessions and farm machinery that had also been brought in for the clearing of the land and all of that stuff. Mercenaries were shipped to Jonestown, trained, instructed, armed, and then flown to an airstrip, flown from the airstrip to Angola. The reason Jonestown was used was because Henry Kissinger had given the CIA orders to arm rebel groups in Angola. However, the CIA was subject to new legislation as a result of who? Congressman Leo Ryan, where they weren't allowed to do that directly. So you had to use laundered money so that you didn't require congressional approval. So before congressional authorization could be obtained, a covert program was needed, and the agency could not use its Cubans because they had green cards and it could all be traced back to the US. So according to another reporter, CIA case officers in Brazil transported the mercenary recruits to the Brazilian coast, where Phil Blakely would pick them up in one of the temple's ships for a 2 or 3 day trip up the river to Jonestown. Blakely, who became one of Jones' top lieutenants, apparently managed the whole program like it was a business, under the command of 100 or 200 special forces advisors, some of whom were on the temple's security staff, and the Brazilian mercenaries helped clear the jungle as part of their basic training. To preserve the agency's cover, 2 camps were established. Blakely's was the main camp where the land was cleared, which eventually goes on to be Jonestown. The second was a more primitive outpost used for the jungle training portion of the course. Blakely's training camp required ultra-sophisticated weapons, explosives not commercially available to the general public, and it was widely acknowledged that Deborah Blakely, as the financial secretary of the Temple Church, appropriated the money to purchase the arms for her husband's project. Blakely turned the training camp over to Jones for the second part of the assignment, which was called the Shalom Project, SHALOM, which used state-of-the-art technology from marijuana centers in Mendocino County, California, where Blakely did his internship to grow marijuana for what the CIA head of the Angolan task force would describe as the hemp smoking rebels they were supporting. The marijuana could have been grown for profit as well. Is that crazy?
It's think about all the ones. I mean, there's one, I hate to say it, half a mile from me, because they're making huge profits on that stuff. And I'm not talking about, you know, the medicinal part of it. I'm talking like the alternative reason to use it. And tread lightly, because I know some of my people like the leafy substance. But
so also, if you go back and you read some of the more mainstream publications like the Washington Post or the New York Times, they describe Jones as a communist. And of course, we've already talked ad nauseum about the misuse of that term. But it's important because they wanted to give you the persona that he was a psychopath communist whose drug-induced paranoia is what triggered the whole mass suicide event. And you have to believe all parts of that story in order for the story to hold, because they have to slap everything nasty with the label communist. At least 6 months before the massacre, Jones went out of his way to give the impression that he was, in fact, a communist. Now, keep in mind, I just told you that in Brazil, they installed a dictator, not a communist. He was very friendly to the West. He worked for the CIA there. In what's the other one? Brazil. He was involved in Cuba, and he was involved in Grenada. Okay, so he's definitely not a communist. He is a CIA agent. But the woman, Layton, Deborah Layton, that's married to the guy that's helping him with the terror training camp, courted both the Soviet and Cuban embassies in Guyana for help with a thing called the May Day celebration down there. Because just like with Oswald in the JFK assassination, they have to dirty you up with the Russian/communist label in order to disguise what they're actually doing, which has nothing to do with communists. And that's kind of my frustration from our pre-show conversation about people that want to compare the difference between fascism, which is what I call the dictators that they installed. They're fascists because the whole relationship in every country the CIA went into was big business with a dictator. That's what Mussolini was. He's a fascist. Big businesses with a dictator. That's what Hitler was. Big businesses like the IG Farben's with a dictator. The Bolsheviks was government run everything. That's communism. They are not the same thing. But if you don't have both and you don't set both of them up and you label them as one far left and one far right, then you don't have the ability to play them off of each other. If all you did was ever set up big business with a fascist dictator, then you don't have the yin and the yang. You don't, it's everybody's going to be against that, and everybody being against that would then have us all center as patriots and fight that. They can't have that. They have to have you scared between two big bad things. And they're going to put one up here and they're going to put one up here, and they're going to tell you, you don't want either one of them. And so we're going to guide you down the middle to this safe place from both of those big boogeymen. And that safe place is a new world government that basically incorporates elements of both. That's what this whole thing is about. And in every one of the countries down there, in South America, they did what they did and installed these dictators for the international syndicate Western business owners and lawyers and bankers to come in and rape all the resources from all of these countries down in South America. They didn't want any more. Colonization was bad and looked upon as not good. They just came up with a different way to colonize by installing a dictator through the CIA and taking over the businesses. It's the exact same thing. The local people are going to get screwed and used as slaves, but they're not a colony. They give them the ruse or the makeup of a democracy when they're in no way a democracy at all. They are under the capture of the CIA Western Operation Gladio International Syndicate control. We're just not calling them a colony anymore because they want to dominate the language.
Jesus.
So there's a whole nother aspect, which would take a whole nother hour to explain on the MK Ultra thing. What I do want to point out, though, is the Leighton guy that we keep referring to was intimately involved. If you look at Richard Helms' Operation MK Ultra, CIA designated program starting in the 1950s, tested drugs on humans, mind control, modification. Supposedly it terminated in 1974. I don't believe that for a minute, because they'd also tell you Operation Gladio terminated sometime after it was exposed, which it absolutely did not. But it does go on to say that the CIA shifted it from public institutions in the late 70s to private cults, including the People's Temple. This was the thesis for a paper called The Penal Colony, PENAL Colony, written by a Berkeley psychologist. And they believe the author, although on the actual paper that I saw, his name wasn't on it, but they believe it was written by Richard, and I'll spell his last name, OFSHE. He basically, again, which would make sense because Jones was out in San Francisco, which is co-located in the area where Berkeley is, that he would be part of this. So Jones received treatment at Langley Porter Psychiatric Institute in San Francisco, the nation's leading center for brain research. Langley Porter was known for experiments it conducted on behalf of DARPA, predecessor, which is called ARPA, Advanced Research Projects Agency, but it's basically DARPA. While much of that research is classified, the Institute experimented with electromagnetic effects and behavioral modification techniques to include hypnosis. And that is the reason why, because he himself was subject to parts of that. And then he goes on to hire people. So let me make this point too. The hospital that was co-located in the next town where Jonestown was had over 50 psychiatrists or psychologists on staff, where normally you would have maybe 5. They had 50. The medicine building on the Jonestown campus the day of the massacre had enough medicine associated with it for a middle-sized American city that would have lasted a year for 900 people, and 90% of the medication that was in that building was for psychiatric experiments and psychological experiments.
Wow.
It was not aspirin. So there was unequivocally an MK Ultra experiment going on there, and there was unequivocally a Operation Gladio operation going on at Jonestown in Guyana.
Freaking. You dropped some bombs on us right here at the end, Colonel, especially when you explained, like, this is what's going on. That was phenomenal. I actually made sure I put a bookmark on it because I want to do a highlight reel from that. When you were speaking a few minutes ago, you brought up a gentleman's name of Frank Turple. And I was like, that sounds familiar. But I started looking it up into it, and I'll link this.
It's in a lot of Gladio stories.
So it's interesting. So, and I'll link this, as always, I'll link all this in the description. But I found a short letter, and it's worthy of a quick read. And then we'll bring this to an end, because I know we've been going for a good minute here, but I'll bring it on the screen. There you go. So that way people can see it. It's approved for release. It has it listed as a CIA stamp. Radio TV Reports Incorporated, for public affairs staff. It says program, morning edition. The date's November 8th, 1983, 7:30 a.m., City, Washington, D.C. Subject, Frank Turple. And like I said, I'll read it because it's not too long. Bob Edwards, international arms dealer. Bob Edwards is the one speaking. I'm sorry, so people understand. International arms dealer Frank Turple had everything: real estate in Washington and London, a Rolls, a Mercedes, and enough cash in Swiss bank accounts to live without working for the rest of his life. His business, selling the skills he had learned while working for the CIA in the early 70s. But in 1980, Turple's business fell apart after arranging to sell guns to 2 undercover police officers in New York. He was arrested and indicted, but fled the country before his trial. He's been a fugitive now for 3 years. And I'm going to come back to that part because it just connected some dots for me. But in 1980, a few months ago, reporter Jim Hogan got a call from Turple. They had met before. Turple wanted to talk. They spoke together in Eastern Europe and again on an island in the Caribbean. Those interviews appear in this month's Penthouse magazine and are heard this week in our series on Turple. Here's part 2, prepared by Jim Hogan. And this is Frank Turple speaking now. I think my lifestyle had been on a contemporary basis with an up-and-coming young Washington millionaire with all the assets and all the fine things that go with it. A big house, the right cars, the right address, office buildings, all the respectable amenities that go with the lifestyle in the Washington area. Continuing, this is Jim Hogan, who says, even before Frank Turple became a fugitive, he was a man in motion. He moved with the movers and shook with the shakers because in the end, he loved making deals. Deals were what he had instead of values, and they rewarded him with sick veneer of respectability, whether the deal involved a Libyan assassination contract, combat boots and basketballs for Uganda, or fluorescent saddles for camels in Saudi Arabia. The deal was the same. What is so shocking about Turple is not so much the deals that he made as the thoughts that lay behind them. For example, when upwards of 1,000 people committed suicide in JONESTOWN, most Americans reacted with horror, but not Frank Turple. When he learned from a friend in the State Department that the U.S. government intended to bring the JONESTOWN victims home for burial, Turple saw a unique business opportunity: the possibility for he and his friend at the state to make a quick killing in the casket business. While the deal fell through, other deals were made, and they often depend upon who Turple knew: a pal in the CIA, a crooked congressman, a manufacturer of exotic explosives, or a demolitions expert in the Army who wanted to make a few extra bucks and didn't care how he did it. We did it. Little typo there. The same could be said of Turple's partner, former CIA officers Edwin T. Wilson. Wilson's huge estate in the Virginia countryside was, until the indictments came raining down against him, a magnet for U.S. senators and high-ranking CIA and Pentagon officials. Today, the Wilson is the subject of a grand jury investigation into the alleged corruption of public officials. According to Turple, more than one politician was bribed in an effort to procure lucrative defense contracts and other favors. Whatever one may say about Frank Turple, and there is much to be said, all of it obvious, the fact is that he could not have prospered without the help of friends in high places. Unlike the fugitives, they remained in business. Turple: American politics is a bleeped unbelievable. When they shake their finger at somebody else, they really should be looking into their own backyard. And then it's Hogan. It wasn't just money that was at stake. It was countries and armies. In one case, Turple says Libya was able to purchase an order of battle for Chad. That is to say, a complete description of the country's defense forces. Libya was able to do so with the help of Ed Wilson and his contracts in the intelligence community. The result, a bloody invasion that saw an American enemy attack an American ally, the best intelligence the U.S. taxpayers' dollars could provide. Without the order of the battle, the invasion might have never taken place. I'm Joe Hogan for the National Public Radio to end that little receipt there. Now, the reason it caught my attention, I mean, obviously there's a lot to this, but you guys remember when I was talking about LA Clear, that they created these central hubs where us in law enforcement say, hey, I'm working on this particular subject at this particular location to prevent the blue on blue crime. And then after putting my Gladio glasses on now, I'm like, holy smokes, we were feeding the feds, local law enforcement were not compromised what we're looking into. So if we happen to hit a target that's really a CIA operative, or whether we start to touch something that's going to affect a CIA operation, they know how to move people, or even worst case scenario, pull people away from investigations like they did Alpha when he started to find out about MS-13, Mata Salvatrucha, coming into Southern California. And then all of a sudden I got put on a different assignment to look at stupid things that had to do with massage parlors. And when I see this, it says that, obviously he's been working with the CIA, he's doing this stuff, but 2 NYPD guys come across him and put a case on him. Why? Because of the local guys. They don't know all this clandestine stuff that's taking place. They're just doing their job, but now they compromise someone that's of importance, and, et cetera, how they explain it. So how would you counter that? As the federal agencies, the CIA, NSA, all of them, I would say, hey, you know what? A way to do this is let's tell law enforcement that we want to prevent these blue on blue crimes and create these central hubs of intelligence, like LA Clear. And then anytime they tap on one of our guys, we can intervene to make sure our operations aren't exposed and our guys aren't arrested. That's just my thought process when I read this. I don't know if there's anything else that stuck out to you on this one, Colonel.
Well, Turple, his whole he overlaps a lot with Gladio, but also you mentioned Edwin Wilson. Edwin Wilson got designated as a owner of a whole bunch of front companies for the CIA. And he's involved in the Iran-Contra. He's involved in the Libyan gun cells. I don't know how many people know about, because remember, Gladio has arms cells, drug cells, human trafficking. And basically Wilson incorporates all of them. He had special training for psychological operations as well. He worked with the Navy intel. He also had involvement with Carlos the Jackal and Ted Shackley, who comes across on a whole bunch of all of these people. And you just highlighted, without even me having to, hey, you look into this. But that's what I'm telling you. You did exactly what I hope everybody does. You look up the one name, and then it ties to Edwin Wilson. And anybody that's heard some of my other stuff on my Rumble channel, you're going to know Edwin Wilson. She talks about him in a whole bunch of different books. And that's what you will do. You will see all of these same people. They operate in a very small, tight-knit group. Now, Wilson did go to jail. He was indicted. And I cannot explain. I don't have an answer. Although people have alleged that some people go to jail to protect them, because if they're not going to be in jail, there's like a hit out for them. And it's the only way. They did that in Italy, by the way, for a lot of Operation Gladio, when they wanted them off the streets to protect them. And then they just mysteriously walk out of jail later on and go to another country. But the other guy, Turple, he ends up skipping the country, and he ends up in Cuba. And he dies in Cuba, like in 2016, of supposedly natural causes. But basically went there and hid out the entire time because they knew they wouldn't extradite him. He got himself in trouble in Cuba too, because he was trying to hawk some kind of like nutritional something, if I remember right. But anyway, yeah.
Freaking just wow. We're going to get right into the last segment here, so I can let the Colonel get back to her life, and Alpha can get to mine, because I'm starving as well. I'm like, I wonder if they can hear my stomach on the mic. It's so if you guys hear it, my apologies. I've been trying to adjust the nozzle. But let me bring it up on the screen. Your guys' comments from the last episode. We're going to fly through these really, really quick. First one coming from only LJW. Thank y'all for putting the links to all the previous Gladio videos. I've been posting them on my locals channel. I don't have hardly any followers on locals, but it gives me a holding place for videos I believe to be important. What they're talking about, you guys, down in the description, if you're new here, all the links to find Colonel Towner so you can follow her, and all the links to the previous episodes are listed down there. And then you guys go look up only LJW and give them a follow. They're out here doing work, and they're already creating playlists for you. So that's a solid. Next one comes from Coolwan. I remember the case where the U.S. soldier was prosecuted for not wearing a UN uniform. Book, Michael New, Mercenary or American Soldier. We talked about that on the last show, and I highlighted that because you guys go get that book. Support the father, support the son. Super important, and you'll see how it ties into the last episode that we talked about. And then as we continue up, Swamp Mountain, interesting name. I think I just like the name on this one too. This is Janet Ossabard level intel. I'm looking forward to rewatching her Follow the Cabal series with my Gladio glasses on. Thank you, Alpha and Colonel. Wow, what a huge compliment. That, thanks for that one. And if you want to say anything on any of these, let me know, Colonel. And
Sure, go ahead.
This one comes from Muzi QE. Yikes! I binge watch 1 through 6, and my poor brain had to go to the beach to recuperate. Mind blowing. Just finished 7, but I had to say, all these people screaming this should have been done already. It should be faster. Just do it. End it. They are just not understanding the incredible, overwhelming intricacies, the massive complexity of it. We are infiltrated and controlled by the all-encompassing spider web. No wonder it is taking a long time. God bless all those up front and behind the scenes in this epic battle of good over evil. God bless the Republic of the United States of America, and God bless us all. I know what it feels like when your brain is just like, I need a break.
The only thing that I would add to that is I think we're going to find out reporters like Danny Casolaro that was murdered. He called it the octopus. I believe he was talking about Operation Gladio. I went back and read several of his articles. I'm convinced he was talking about Operation Gladio. And it's the same thing with Mike Benz. He talks about the blob. He refers to the blob. I refer to it as the International Syndicate. He is talking about the cyber version of Operation Gladio.
Man, those are two parallels that just people need to hear that together. That's huge, especially with fifth generation warfare. And we know how much, the cyber realm of that plays into it.
Yep.
JC Vader. These are some short ones as we wrap it up here. JC Vader 369. Look up Japanese Unit 731. And that one just got my curiosity. So I was just like, I
know all about that. That's their psychological operation. It was a torture and experimental unit. We actually cover it in Golden Lily in the book review we're doing right now. It was used to experiment on people. It was basically an MK Ultra, only with much more lethal, nasty. They experimented on agents. It was a bioweapons lab that they used real American people and Chinese people to experiment on it. It was horrific.
Oh my gosh.
Like bubonic plague. They would give people that and then watch them.
My heart goes out to the Falun Gong out there in China that I think are being subjected to that kind of stuff right now. Next one is ICQ. Oh, see what you did there. I didn't even catch that the first time around. ICQ people. George H.W. Poppy Bush, Secret Service name was Timberwolf.
Yes, it was.
And if you guys are like, what? You got to go back and watch the last series. You'll understand why werewolves and wolves and all those things play into that particular comment. Regina Matthews, this sounds like MK Ultra. That young man just did not murder. So that was a blood sacrifice. Wolves, like a group of satirists for blood sacrifices. And
exactly.
I think that was, Frogger 808 is the last one. Alpha was talking about FEMA and state agents. The Maui Lahaina fired people were misdirected by police, were taking orders from FEMA via the police chief Pelletier, who was also involved with the Las Vegas Mandalay Bay shootings, both incidents at the highest casualties in U.S. history. People got the glasses on, Colonel. and I absolutely love it. Colonel, we will be signing off. You guys, we went commercial free, so do me a solid, stick around, support the people that support this show, and then do me another solid, get over to the Colonel's Corner. I mean, you're hearing about this book review, the Japanese unit. If you guys were doing that, you'd be like me, we would have already known that stuff. So you're missing out if you're not subscribed to the Colonel's Corner. Those links are down in the description. As always, Colonel, it's been absolutely phenomenal, and I look forward to the next one. My heart weighs because I'm just like, there's going to be a time when the Colonel's going to tell me, and that's all she wrote, Alpha. And I'll be like, no, you can't have a personal life, Colonel. You can't. So with that, you guys, make sure you keep the Colonel in your prayers, and then add an extra prayer for myself and my family, and we'll catch you guys next time. The AlphaWarrior Show, first in, last out, and Semper Fi, everyone.
When I started MyPillow, it was just a problem solution, one product company. Well, since then, with the help of my dedicated employees, we now have hundreds of products, some you might not even know about. To get the word out, we're having a $25 extravaganza. 2-pack multi-use MyPillows, $25. MyPillow sandals, $25. And for the first time ever, our 6-pack towel sets, you guessed it, just $25. Our brand new 4-pack dish towels, $25. And I've never done this before. Premium MyPillows with all new Giza fabric, any size, any loft level, even king size for only $25. And there's so much more. So go to MyPillow.com or call the number on your screen. Use your promo code for our $25 extravaganza. Order $75 and over. Your entire order ships absolutely free.
Are you worried about the effects that higher inflation rates will have on your investments? Are you trying to secure your retirement savings against losses, but you notice that inflation is a hot topic these days? But how dangerous are low inflation rates on your retirement savings? An inflation rate of 2% may not seem like much, but it means that prices will just about quintuple over the lifetime of the average American. And 4% average inflation rate means that something that costs $1 when they're born will cost $23 when they die. That demonstrates the danger of even low inflation rates. So when it comes to gold and inflation rates, many investors want to know whether inflation rates have an effect on gold prices. What history indicates is that over the long term, increased inflation should lead to correspondingly higher gold prices. From September 1971 to August 2020, gold grew 7.5 times as much as inflation. Not only can an investment in physical gold help protect your assets against the damage done by inflation, it can also help grow the value of your retirement portfolio over the long term. If you're looking to protect your retirement assets, why wait until stock markets crash and gold begins to rise in price?